You guys, I am so excited for today's episode and today's guest. Get ready. It's going to be such an incredible one. We have Ava Nouri. Ava is a registered dietitian and the host of the Loving Wellness podcast. Welcome to Seeing Other People.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and can't wait to dig into everything with you today.
I'm so excited. So, if you guys are new to Ava and to Loving Wellness, I was honored to be a guest a few weeks back. So, pause this episode, go check out that podcast, check out that episode, or any of Ava's other incredible episodes, then come back and listen to this one. But I am so excited. I feel like there's so much in our conversation that I've been looking forward to. And there's so much that you bring to the table from your work and just from the way you approach life that I think the Seeing Other People family is going to gain a lot out of. So thank you for being here. I would love to start by hearing how did you get to where you are today in your career and life? Like what brought you to being an RD and hosting your podcast?
Well, first of all, thank you for that reflection. And yeah, it's a good question, a good place to start. I think there's so many different things in my life that have led me to where I am today. And for me, it was a combination of going through my own experiences with health, with my own wellness, and my own journey with that, but also, you know, the spiritual side of things. And I definitely went through my own and I'm still going through my own inner growth journey. And I think that that's where my work comes in is I really try to blend, the science, the things that I've learned in my education, in my experience with clients and all those things with the things I've learned in my own inner growth journey with intuition and intention and really helping people heal from all different sides so that they can actually be like their most aligned selves, not just healthy physically or not just mentally well, but all of it.
Mhm.
And, for me, I think I went through a lot of my most developmental experiences. And of course, we're always going to go through things that shape us, but I went through a lot at a young age. And, I'm Persian. I was born in Iran actually, and my family immigrated to the US when I was just 3 years old
Wow.
and we moved to California and you know even just the fact that I had to learn how to just be in this new culture when I had parents who had no idea what this culture even was. But also, I moved a lot as a child, when we moved to America, and I had to learn how to kind of fend for myself, make new friends over and over again. I went through a lot of health issues at a young age too. Like I had the worst gut issues ever as a little kid, as a teenager. I've gone through so many different symptoms. We don't have to like get into the specifics, but I always kind of used these experiences as ways to learn and grow. And I'm the type of person who, if something is wrong, I kind of take it into my own hands and try to learn as much as possible. And I think that's really what has shaped me into like wanting to help other people with those things. So, yeah, I mean, we could get into so many different aspects of my journey from dealing with health issues at a young age to, getting into nutrition at a very young age as well. I was in middle school when I got into all this. And then as it does with many people who identify as perfectionists and type A people, it got a little out of hand in high school. And I went through my own journey with disordered eating and eating disorder when I was pretty young. And I also went through my own kind of awakening of how important nutrition is pretty young. And I also went through a really long period of not really knowing myself and then having to kind of shed a lot of layers that I picked up. So there's so many different pieces. But I think I went through a lot of healing. I healed my eating disorder. I healed the emotional parts of me. And I feel like that all happened for a reason so that I could really share my experiences and help people and have that guide the way I help others now. And so that I can be an example that you can heal.
Yeah, I love all of that. And thank you for sharing that so beautifully and vulnerably. I think it's so special that, you said you blend all of these experiences and your expertise and science. I think that's what gives you so much to offer people. It's not just that you learned about it in school, it's not just that you had your own
Right.
experiences, it's not just that you did some research, it's all of it. And you can tell there's obviously so much passion and so much that is meaningful to you where you really do want to help others, whether it's related to something you went through or not. And I think that's so beautiful about what so many people in this space are doing, it's because they really care and they really wanna help, and just thank you for doing the work that you do.
Thank you. You're too kind.
Have you always been spiritual? I know you mentioned that that's been a part of your journey. I'm curious where that came from and when that part of your life began, or if it's always been there.
Yeah, I think to a certain extent, the answer is yes. I have a very spiritual mom, and spirituality, not that it's always been a part of my life, but at a very young age, I was learning certain things and certain perspectives that weren't mainstream. They were more of a spiritual perspective, but it wasn't until high school when I was healing from my eating disorder where I really had to dig deep within myself. I didn't get help or go seek, a therapist, which, looking back, maybe I should have, but everything happens for a reason, I believe. And I know that's cliche, but I truly believe that. And I really had to do my own inner work. And, it started with things as simple as like affirmations and working on my own self worth. But I think it really got deeper in college. And this is a good segue into, our conversation today. My boyfriend actually was a lot of the influence that like really got me into spirituality. His
Oh,
parents
wow.
have master's degrees in spiritual psychology. They raised their children, my
That's a
boyfriend and his
degree?
brothers. Yeah, literally, yes, that's a degree.
Oh my god. Okay, wow, cool.
Very cool. And they raised their children in a way that most people don't. And when I started he never kind of put these things on me, but when we started dating, I was going through my own inner growth. And it was when COVID hit too, so we were all kind of looking at our lives, looking at our own stuff. A lot was coming up for me, and he started sharing little things here and there. He also started sharing, tools that he had. And most importantly, I think, which is I think a unique thing, is that he shared a person with me. um I would call him kind of like a spiritual healer, guide, whatever. He's like my spiritual coach. It's like a therapist, but not really. And he's like everything, but I never know how to describe him. But I started working with him, and it wasn't immediately when we started dating, but really like a few 10 months maybe into dating AJ, my boyfriend, I really started getting deeper in that work and going through, peeling back layers and unlearning so many of the things that we learn and are told when we grow up. I think we're all told these things like you're not worthy or you're not enough or you're not smart enough or you suck. Basically, we all have these dialogues going on in our heads, and it's so deep within us. There's so much in our subconscious, and we're not even conscious of it. It's in the word. So we have to be that much more careful and that much more intentional about going in and trying to unlearn those things. And that's really what I did in my relationship. And I think my relationship has been such a beautiful kind of vessel for that. And it's really a unique experience. And I don't think you have to have a spiritual partner to be spiritual or to have someone who's going through these things as well in order for you to have that journey. But I think what's important is really just having the intention of going through that and growing. And I think that's something we share in common, which has been really nice in my relationship as well.
Yeah, I think that's really special and meaningful because, a lot of people focus so much on healing from a breakup or healing from some traumatic experience that they went through. And, you know, I think a huge theme among my listeners is like wanting so badly to be in a relationship. And it's like, okay, how can we
Hmm.
be our best selves so that we can find our person and get into the relationship? But people often discount the healing and the growth and the learning that happens in a relationship. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, and I'd love to talk about that more because it's something that if you're going to be somebody's life partner, or even in a relationship for 6 months, a year, a few years, like there's so much that you can learn from that other person. There's so much for you to offer that other person too. And it's so important to look for those things and to also look for a partner that you could find those things in.
100%. And, I see relationships as like literally a spiritual assignment, right? And your person, whether it's your person for that time, whether you're in a relationship, like you said, for a few months, or it's like your life partner, which we never know, things always are changing.
Right.
We're always growing and evolving, and there's always the possibility that you're going to outgrow that person or out evolve that
Yeah.
person, and that's okay. But really, like, your partner is your mirror. And the things that maybe irk you or irritate you about that person are usually things that you have within yourself that you need to work through in some way, shape, or form. And, instead of, I think a lot of us try to kind of control our partners or make them, you have to be this certain way, make someone who you think they should be, and instead, you need to kind of see that as, what do I need to work on myself, like allowing them to really reflect to you who you are really here to step into. And I think that's really important, and an important mindset shift that I had to have, because I didn't start out that way in my relationship. I wasn't, thinking these things, but um you grow into that and evolve into that. And for me, so many lessons in my life have come out of my relationship and not from when I was single. I think there's, so much value to being single, and so much inner growth that you can have in that stage of life. But for me, from even letting go of people pleasing to learning how to set healthy boundaries, like, you don't do these things in a vacuum in yourself. You do these
Right.
things in relationships. So that's also another thing to come back to, is like, if you really want to grow, be in a long-term relationship. Like, they will put a mirror right up to your face, and sometimes it's not pretty, but it's really, it's for your own good, I believe.
Is there anything that you were looking for when you were single and when you met him that you saw in him as, "Oh, this is a person who I could be challenged by, or this is the person who I would learn a lot with." Like, were you looking for those things intentionally, or did it come naturally once you formed your relationship?
I think both. I think I was, into someone else before I mean, we were friends for years before we started dating. And it was funny, before we started dating, we were both trying to help each other with these other people. Like, he was giving me advice on
Love.
dating, I was giving him advice on dating. We both didn't know the person we were looking for was right under our noses, but I feel like that happens a lot. And so no, I wasn't like, seeking a lot out in him, but I realized once I was looking at, like, why do I like this person? The person I was, really into before him. It's like, what are the things about that person that I really like? And then I realized that AJ had that and more. And I also think it's so valuable to date a friend. I mean, I'm not saying you have to date your friends, but it's really valuable to have that friendship, that foundation before, because you know who they are. And I think for me, like, the most important things are someone who's open, someone who's really accepting and loving and caring, and who makes me feel secure. And he always made me feel that way in our relationship and our friendship. And someone who's just silly and fun and can, have a good time as well. Like, it doesn't have to be so serious, too. I think that word spiritual and, like, all this inner growth stuff can get really heavy sometimes. And it doesn't feel that way. Like, it doesn't have to be hard just because it's growth and work. It doesn't have to be hard. So I think coming back to that and being with someone you can really feel like your most authentic self around. And I really felt that from him. I never felt insecure. I never felt like I had to hide parts of myself. And I think that's what I was always looking for. And I didn't realize that it was right in front of me.
Yeah, it is so interesting. I was thinking about this the other day, how for so long, like probably for the majority of my 20s until I met Jake, every guy that I really liked, I did not feel comfortable with them. I didn't feel like I could be myself with them. I felt like I had to impress them. I had to win them
Hmm.
over. And I wish I could go back and shake myself and be like,
Yeah.
Alana, wake up. In what world do you think that this is somebody you could build a life with or be
Yeah.
in a serious relationship with? Like, you're not happy. This is a thing that you don't feel good in. And it's so crazy how our minds trick us into saying, well, we want this, we need this, when really that's not at all what we need. What we need is exactly what you said, someone to feel comfortable with, who is like feels like your best friend, who you can just be silly with and have meaningful conversations with, but also just hang out with. And I just I feel like there's such a misconception that the person we want is that person who we have the huge crush on, who, like, maybe they'll notice us and, maybe they'll give us the time of day. Like,
Yeah.
that's not what this is about.
No. I never had that, like, not that I never felt this way, but before things happened very fast for us, and of course, there was that falling in love stage where it did feel like I had the biggest crush in the world and the butterflies and all that stuff, but before, I did not feel that way. In fact, I he had asked me to a date party 2 years prior, and we went as friends because I was like, Are you trying to go as friends? Are you trying to go as something more?" And I made sure that it was, as friends, this is platonic, and you have to be open. You never know what someone is going to also grow into, right? Like,
Yeah.
we both became different people in those 2 years, but also
Right,
it's
maybe had you tried it at the time, it wouldn't have
exactly.
worked.
I know it wouldn't have worked, and I still had so much more to learn, and I had a relationship prior to that that taught me so much, and, I mean, it was short-lived, but regardless of the amount of time you're in a relationship, they're all these assignments, I think, for us to learn something. Like, you have to learn something from a relationship. You're not just gonna be stagnant, and I think also people stay in relationships for too long and don't realize that they're not growing anymore, and I think that's the sign. It's like when you stop growing or they stop growing or you start growing in different directions or apart, like, that's when you end it. It's not when you have a fight or, like, one little conflict and then you break it off. So I think that's also just a nice reminder to, like, if you're in a relationship, you feel stuck, asking yourself that question, like, is it because you're not growing or is it because there's something you're avoiding or a hard conversation you don't want to have, or something your soul wants you to learn that you're not willing to learn and look at right now.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. How would you explain it to somebody if someone was listening to this and they're like, "Well, how do I know if I'm no longer growing?" How would you articulate that, or what are the questions that person should be asking?
That's such a good question. And it's really hard because it depends on where you're at in your life, right? But I think, I'm trying to think of in my last relationship. And, I also have a friend who recently went through, I mean, it's not even that recent anymore, but she went through a breakup, and it was kind of that situation where she kind of felt stuck in her life. Like, she wasn't growing at all. Nothing was exciting her anymore. Nothing was moving and flowing. And I think that's also where growth happens. It's like, if you're growing, you're progressing, even if it's hard or things are really overwhelming. If you're going forward, you're going to feel that. But if you're
Mhm,
stuck and you're kind of things don't feel as exciting to you anymore, maybe it's, you don't have as much energy to give to your friends, or you feel like you're kind of retreating inward. I feel like that's where that growth stops happening, and you're kind of in that freeze mode. And I think that's where you need to look at things like, what is it that's pulling on my energy? And it can often be a relationship, but I think you can really ask yourself those questions of, like, am I avoiding something, or am I unhappy in this relationship because this person doesn't make me feel safe, or this person's belief system doesn't align with mine anymore. And it
mhm,
comes back to asking yourself that too, because I think it's also really important to have similar values and belief systems in order to grow together. And I think a lot of people, maybe one person will get into something that the other person doesn't really feel, that they align with, whether it's a new growth mindset that the other person just doesn't want to adopt, or someone's getting really into fitness. It can be as simple as that, and the other person doesn't want to do that. Like, it's really about seeing if your lives and your priorities align. So you can also ask yourself, I think, are you growing in similar ways in that your priorities are similar?
mhm. Are you growing in the same direction or different?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and hearing your explanation of, like, when the growth is no longer happening, I feel like the first thing I thought of was different jobs that I felt very at first it was, like, complacent in, and then I felt trapped, where I
Yes.
felt like there was not a single thing that excited me, and every single day I was like, "Oh, like, I have to go to this stupid job again. I wanna
Yes.
leave, but, like, where am I gonna go?" And because of that, I was, like, afraid of the unknown of, will I get another job? Where will I get another job? Like, starting over, I stayed in jobs longer than I should have, and we see that all the time in relationships where people are
Mhm.
like, well, I'd rather be in this like meh relationship than start all over and go back into the dating pool. But no, you would rather leave and start over and push yourself way out of your comfort zone, because that's exactly where you're going to grow and you're going to end up with something or someone so much better and so much more right.
Yeah, and it's like being honest with yourself too. Like, do you really want to be in that relationship for the rest of your life? Like, you're going to be miserable. And you have
Yeah.
to think about your future self too and what they would want for you. And also, if you're thinking about having kids in the future, like, you have to take all these things into account. Do you want to have kids who have parents who are just with each other to be with someone and to have a
Right.
partner? Or do you want kids who are going to have parents who really love each other and are
Yeah.
growing together?
I once had somebody break up with me, and in the conversation, he said, I'm surprised that you didn't break up with me sooner.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And that was a huge wake up call for me. It's like horrifying to look back on that I let myself stay in
Yeah.
a relationship like that where I was not being treated like anything, where he like probably delayed him breaking up with me because he just kept waiting for me to break up with him. But
Mhm.
that's like, you should never get to that point. Like, your
Never.
life is in your control.
100%. And it's that communication piece too, right? Like neither of you were communicating how you were feeling in the
Yeah.
relationship, and you probably could have avoided so many hard conversations, or even just the time that you wasted. Not that you
Yeah.
wasted it, you were still learning probably in that relationship even though you stayed longer than you probably should have, but just a
It was
lot could be
pain,
avoided. Yeah.
prolonged, yeah,
Yeah.
prolonged pain.
A lot could be
Yeah,
avoided with proper communication, and we don't learn how to do that. So it's
right.
not it's you have to be kind and gentle with yourself as well.
Yeah. Okay, so you and AJ were friends first, and then you
Yes.
started dating years
Yes.
later. What happens next? Because I know that this relationship went in different directions metaphorically for a bit.
Yes. It's funny, we actually in the beginning, it was pre-COVID, and that's when we first kissed and all this stuff happened, and it was like, "Oh my gosh, this is happening." And then he left 4 days after our first kiss to go abroad for the semester. So we
No. Oh my god, okay.
there's this common thread of, like, distance in our relationship. Like, our relationship started with him living in Madrid and me living in Berkeley, where we went to college. And that's really when we were falling in love and all these things were happening. It was all virtual, which is hilarious. It was all pre-COVID too. So it's not like the world was virtual. But I think that really set us up for success, because then COVID hit a few months later and he was sent home from abroad, which honestly was a big blessing for just our relationship, because then we got to really build that foundation in person. But a lot of what we were going through in the beginning was apart, and we had that time together. We quarantined together. We're both from LA, so it's funny, we really were put on a fast track at different points in our relationship, and that was one of the first ones. Was we were sleeping at each other's parents' houses, because we all went home from school to our parents' houses, and we were in each other's bubble, right? So we were hanging out with each other's families for hours on end and really spending so much time with one another, because that's really all we could do. So that
Mhm.
really brought us close, and really was an important foundation for our relationship, I think. But then, we were seniors in college, and I ended up feeling this urge to move to New York City. And I was like, I want to go to grad school in New York City. I don't want to go to grad school in California. I want something new. And we had to have some hard conversations, because it's like, we love each other so much. We're in this. Like, do we really want to do long distance? And in the end, we decided to do it. So, like you said, we did go in different directions for a little while. We did long distance for almost 2 years. He was living in
Wow.
LA and I was living in New York. And that was you know, it was a really great time in our relationship, because it really forced us to learn, like I said, how to communicate, how to have the hard conversations, how to not let things build up. Like, when you're long distance, you really have to be intentional and you have to be mindful. So it was a really important time in our relationship. It was challenging for a lot of it, but we can get into, what I think the pros are of long distance relationships, because I think it was in the end a very positive experience and we made it out stronger. So I think that's really the key takeaway is like you're either going to grow together and have long distance shape you, or you're going to have it break you. And it's okay either way. But for us, it ended up working out, which I'm so grateful for. And now we live in the same city. So we're in a little bit more of a normal rhythm with things, but we weren't for a really long time. And I think that was a very shaping experience once again for our relationship.
I'm so happy for you that you didn't let this relationship hold you back from pursuing what you wanted. And I'm so glad that, you had those conversations with him about like, I want to go to New York and what does this mean for our relationship and how are we going to navigate the situation and is this the right decision? And I think it's amazing that you both decided that it was the right decision because it's what you wanted.
Hmm.
And that doesn't mean it was easy. I can only imagine how hard it was, but I agree. I think there are so many pros to long distance, and I would love to hear them because I think there are so many people who are automatically like, nope, I'm not a long distance person. I don't want it. I can't do it. But they've never tried. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's maybe not ideal, but I have been in long distance relationships, and I actually think that there's a lot of positives that come from it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, I want to go back to one thing you said. It's like, I didn't let the relationship hold me back. And especially because we were so young. And I think it also comes back to this idea of true love, like loving as a verb, as an action, gives freedom. And that's one of the things that I've learned a lot in my own spiritual work, my own inner growth, is that loving gives freedom. You have to let people do what they're going to do, right? There's that saying like if you love someone, set them free, and if they're the right person, they'll come back to you, or whatever the saying is. And I think it's so true. I think if I didn't feel that freedom to do what I needed to do to have my own independence, it would be a completely different relationship and I probably wouldn't be in it anymore. So I think that's also
Yeah.
been a constant thread in our relationship that's really been um, a successful part of it. But going back to the pros of long distance, I think, on the topic of freedom, it gives you the freedom to really build your own life apart from your partner. But when you do come together, you add to one another's lives in the process. And I think it's really important, especially, we got together when we were so young, and your 20s, especially your early 20s, are such transformative years, and it's so awesome to grow with someone, and you still do when you're long distance, but you also have to learn how to just be by yourself and be your own best friend and build that own your own self-love. And I think if we were together in the same city, I don't know if I would have had that experience, the depth of that experience. And I also think, like I said, the challenges you face will make you so much stronger as a couple. Like, if you can survive a prolonged period of long distance, you can really survive anything as a couple, I think, because it really, like I said, forces you to learn how to communicate. If you build things up and don't share them, you're going to create distance between you and your partner, not just physical distance, but, that
Mhm.
emotional distance, and feel isolated. And it's really it's really important not to let things build up. So you have to let them out. And you have to let them out in a way that isn't going to make the other person question things. Because, if you communicate in a way that isn't so loving or is very selfish or whatever it is, you're only going to make the other person insecure. And of course, you can't make anyone feel anyway. It's like that's their stuff. But you want to give that person that security, especially when you don't have the physical, closeness to reassure one another.
Yeah, I also think it's a matter of learning how the other wants to be communicated to about certain
Mhm.
things. Like, really, everything you're saying, and I think everything about long distance, like, long distance relationships are literally communication boot camp.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I was, other than communication, there's so many other pros. I think it also really helps build the romance between you. So not only are you learning how to communicate, and that's the basis, instead of maybe, you know, some sort of like lust or attraction, which is necessary to have, attraction in a relationship, but that's not why you're together. But it also really helps build up that romance. Another saying that's very cliche is distance makes the heart grow fonder, and it really does. Like when you come back together after being apart for so long, it's literally like a breath of fresh air. It's a sigh of relief. It's the best, right? And
It's like going
oftentimes,
home.
yeah, it's like coming home, exactly. And it really helps increase like your appreciation for your partner, but you also have to be more intentional about how much, or not how much, but how you spend your time together. it increases that, hopefully, thoughtfulness in both of you. One of my favorite things that AJ did for me when we were long distance is I was working at a hospital for the first year in New York, and I would go to work really early, and he would often leave in the mornings, but after I went to work. And so I'd come home from work the days he left for the airport, and he'd clean up my whole apartment and get me flowers and leave really thoughtful notes. And it's the little things like that that really matter and really shape your relationship, especially when you're long distance and that's kind of all you have. So I think it also kind of helps build that romance up and increases the amount of opportunities to be thoughtful in a way that, if you're together all the time, you can kind of take your partner for granted a lot, and you might not think to do those things.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point and something that anyone, whether they're in a long distance or not long distance relationship, can learn from, or even with our friends. Like I think we
Mhm.
often forget, that something so small can really brighten someone's day or go such a
Yeah.
long way. Like there's so much we love about the people in our lives, and we rarely express that or show it. But it's the greatest thing we can do is show and tell the people that we love them that we love them. And I think what's special is that in a long distance relationship, like you kind of pointed to this, but when you are together, you're so much more intentional with that time, and you're
Mhm.
not just sitting on the couch watching a show. And maybe you are because that's comfortable and it's been a long day and you just want to feel normalcy, but you are having conversations and going places and doing things that are really meaningful. I am curious though, did you ever feel pressure when you would see each other of like, oh, well, we haven't seen each other, or we're not going to see each other for another 6 weeks. We have to make the most of every single second.
100%. And I think that's part of the learning and the growing that comes in being a long distance relationship is we would sometimes build up expectations. There would be pressure to make it the most perfect 2 weeks ever. And it wasn't all rainbows and butterflies he'd come to New York for like 2 weeks at a time. It wasn't the perfect 2 weeks where we weren't fighting at all and didn't have these different things come up, because they are going to come up when you're together, especially because when you're apart, there's not as much space for these things to come up. So it is something you have to work through. And I think a big part of that is just letting yourselves make mistakes and learn throughout the process. Like, this is likely a new experience for both you and your partner. And maybe you've both been in a long distance relationship before, or maybe one of you has, but you've never done it with each other before. And so you have to give yourselves grace and like have these conversations before of like, let's see how things go. We'll probably need to adjust things and see what works for each of us. Like, you really don't know what it's going to be like before. So I think if I could go back, I would try to release any and all expectations of what the distance would look like, and also letting that change too. Like I said, I was working at a hospital, so busy. I was going to grad school at night. The first year I was living in New York, like, we didn't have as much time to spend with one another. And when he was there, I was still, I had all these responsibilities. But then, the second year I had more time. And so it's also letting yourselves flow with like what season of life you're both in, and letting that be okay. And letting it change, not being attached to, we have to see each other X amount of times, or we have to do this and have to do that. I think agreements are important, and I think you do need to set some ground rules, but also have them be open to changing with your lives changing.
Absolutely. Yeah. One thing I've heard some people mention prior about being in long distance is like, oh, well, we made a rule for ourselves that like we have to see each other every 3 weeks, or, we have to FaceTime like on X nights of the week. And
Mhm.
I do agree, like, you have to be open to that changing because life happens, but did you guys ever, set an expectation together of, like, this is how much communication we need, like, we should talk on the phone or we should FaceTime, or, like, we will not feel good if we don't see each other once a month or whatever it is.
Yes, and that goes back to what I was saying about learning. It's like we have to learn what doesn't feel good and what does feel good
Mhm.
for us. Like, it didn't feel good. We once went 2 months without seeing each other just because of travel and things coming up and
Life.
life. Yeah, exactly, and that did not work for us. It was not good. And so we learned from it. We didn't say, "Oh my god, we're going to break up because we didn't see each other for 2 months." It was more like, "Okay, let's be more cautious not to do that again and not to go there again because that didn't end well." So I think it's like you have to learn from your past mistakes, but you also have to, make these agreements like you're saying that are going to work for you, and just be clear what those are, because I think, and it's not just about the long distance or whatever, just in relationships, agreements are really important, because when you don't make clear agreements with one another, that's when things are not clear, and then they become open to interpretation of like, well, maybe this will work, maybe this will work, and that's what causes conflict, I believe, in the first place.
Mhm.
So I think agreements give freedom. I think, like I said, a game plan, some ground rules give freedom, but the flexibility and openness with those things is what also prevents conflicts from happening as well. Um, if we're living a life of just shoulds and woulds and coulds and like we have to do this, like we're gonna fucking hate our lives. We're gonna hate our
Right.
relationships. Like we can't live that way. But there's a balance for sure.
Yeah, there's a balance, and it's not one versus the other. It's not you versus him of like, well, this person said this and, now I need this. It's the two of you. Like you are a team working through this challenge together, and you have to consider
Yes.
your teammates' needs, and sometimes you have to put those before your own, or sometimes you have to say, "All right, like this is really important to me and I need you to be on board with this." And it's just all about it's literally every single thing goes back to
Yeah,
communication. Like, that
literally.
is without a doubt the number one thing for any type of relationship. One thing I would love to hear a little bit from you about, just knowing this relationship, and I think just a little bit about who you are, is maintaining independence when in a relationship. And I will say, in the recent prior to meeting Jake, the long distance relationship that I was in, I actually really enjoyed that I was able to maintain my life,
Hmm.
because before that, the second I would get into a relationship, everything else about me would be out the door. Like I made my entire personality the fact that I was dating this person, and I was the first person to, forget that I had friends. Like I was very guilty of that. And so that's something that I think was really important for me. So I'd love to hear your experience about, maintaining your independence or being an independent person in a long-term relationship.
Yeah, that's definitely something I've had to adapt to, because I am a very independent person. And, I think there's always a spectrum of things. So, like, some people who would identify, I think, as ultra independent, it's like a lot of those people will say, like, I don't even want to be in a relationship. I'm not a relationship kind of person, because they prefer things, they prefer doing things their own way. And I think that's like, okay, let's take a look at why. Like, do you think you're not worthy of love? Like, what's the limiting belief underlying that? But I think just being an independent person in general, it just makes it, you have to be so much more careful and intentional. So, like, we're all in our own worlds. We're all selfish as humans, right? We're all kind of thinking of our own needs, our own selves. And
And if you're not, you should be.
yeah, exactly. You should be. But I think when you're super independent, or at least for myself, like I'm even more likely to be in my own world and focused on myself and my own stuff, that sometimes I forget to consider the other person. And I said loving gives freedom. Another thing I've learned is that loving gives consideration. Like loving is consideration. And at the end of the day, we all just want to be considered. We all just want to be, we want to know that the other person cares about us and cares about how we feel and cares about what we think. So it's something as simple as like coming back to the question of, AJ, how can I support you? Like I had to learn how to ask these questions. Like he's the most supportive person ever naturally, and he's always finding ways to make my life easier and help me. And that's literally his love language, is acts of service and words of affirmation. And for me, and it's also, learning how that other person wants to be loved and how considered they need to feel secure in the relationship. But something as simple as just asking how I can support him and be that rock for him is really powerful. And I think we all think that, we don't need anyone when we're really independent. And, I'm an independent, strong woman. And yes, that's true. We're independent. But there's this thing, my friend Stella, Stella. Um,
Mhm.
Stella and I were talking
Which
about.
it makes so much sense that the two of you are friends. Like,
That's so
it's so
funny.
right. It's so right.
Oh my god, if you're listening, Stella, we love you. She's the
So
best.
much.
Um, but Stella and I were talking about relationships and all these things, and she was reading the book Attached, which I actually haven't ever read, but she was sharing this idea about something called the dependency paradox. Have you heard of it?
Briefly. I know, like, slightly about it.
I'm not like well versed in it at all. I haven't even read the book, but what from what she was telling me, it's sort of this idea that like the more we can depend on our partner and trust them and rely on them as that secure home base, as that sense of, home and safety, the more independent we actually can be within the relationship. And it's kind of counterintuitive, because it's like you kind of have to be dependent in a way. And that's different from being codependent and, anxiously attached to that person. This is like given that you're in a securely attached relationship, but it's kind of this idea that like when you do feel secure and when you do feel like you're able to rely on that person, you can be more independent, because you don't have to think about, oh, does this person like me, am I secure in this relationship, are they going to cheat on me, like all those things aren't even thoughts that happen. Opens so much brain space. So I think there's also this idea that like independent people need to rely on people as well, and to just accept that, and to know that, the dependence that you do have on your partner is only going to allow you to be more independent.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad you brought that up. You're right. It is so counterintuitive, but it actually does make sense.
Yeah.
And it's a really good feeling to be independent, but have a partner that you feel secure and stable and comfortable and confident with. And that's going to make you feel even more secure and allow you to be more independent. Like you said, you're not worrying
Yeah.
about like, oh, well, do I need to do XYZ thing to keep them? Or do I
Yeah.
need to worry about what they're doing? Which is something that I experienced so much in the past, was always worrying, like, what are they doing? What are they thinking? Like, am I doing this right? Am I doing that wrong? Now in my relationship with Jake, like we both, of course, have our lives together, but we also completely have our separate lives and the separate things that we love to do. And I've never once had to question, well, what's he really doing? Or
Mhm.
should I not go do that thing because I need to spend the time with him? Because what's going to happen if I don't? Like, I, I felt secure in a way that I haven't before, where I am able to actually be the best version of myself.
Mhm. And I think also for the other person, if like they're dating an independent woman, let's say, it's like I feel like when you're really independent, you also have a lot of ambition, and I think it's important to
Mhm.
first of all find someone, if you are an independent person, who respects that and also wants those things for you. Because if they don't respect your choices and your desires and your wishes for yourself, like that's not going to end well either. So I think whether you're, you know, dating someone who's independent, that's a good reminder to just really be supportive of their goals and their ambitions, and not put them down in any way. But also if you are independent, seeking that out and seeking someone who does believe that you can do all the things you want to do and has that faith in you even more than you might have in yourself. Like I think that's another thing that has been a constant in AJ and my relationship, and I think that's been really important as well.
Yeah, definitely. I have heard listeners and friends come to me and say, like, I feel like I'm too independent now to find love, or I've been single for so long that I can't imagine, as much as I want to find somebody, I almost can't imagine, sharing my life with somebody else. And
Yeah.
while that fear is absolutely valid and makes sense, I also want those people to know that, having a partner, if it's the right partner, you're not going to feel suffocated. You're not going to feel like you're jumping through hoops or changing your entire lifestyle. You're just going
Yeah.
to get a best friend and a cheerleader and someone who's going to support you in your independence and all the things you're doing, and someone for you to support. And it will elevate your life. That's not to say date anyone, like it has to be the right person, but I just don't want anyone to feel like, because you've been single for so long or because you've worked so hard to be a strong, independent woman or person, that there's no room for somebody else, because there is. And if it's a fit, that person will elevate your life and not take over and make you feel uncomfortable and suffocated.
Yeah, you should never have to dim your light to be in a relationship, and if you
No.
do, it's probably not the relationship for you. And you don't have to be in a relationship. Like there's nothing,
Yeah.
we don't have to do anything, right? So if you do want that, like it's a choice, right? You're choosing into it. So you can make the rules. You can choose the person and make that be someone that is like that. And if you haven't found that yet, just know that you can attract it. Just keep giving that love to yourself, keep working on yourself, and putting that intention out there of like, what do you want in a partner? Instead of, I don't want someone who's going to suffocate me. It's like, well, I want someone supportive. I want someone who's going to embrace my ambition, and putting that out there instead. Because the words you use and the thoughts you have, those matter a lot.
So much. It really does. Okay, I have one final question for
Yes.
you, and it's my favorite question to ask. What is the best piece of dating or relationship advice you have ever received?
Ooh, this is such a good question as well. Let me think. I mean, at the end of the day, I think the best relationship advice that I come back to is that our fulfillment, it's not even about, relationships per se, but it's about our relationships with ourselves and how relationships play into that. And it's kind of like, your fulfillment shouldn't come from another person, from another relationship, from your romantic partner. Your fulfillment comes from yourself, not the relationship. And the relationship should just be the cherry on top to an already fulfilled life. And I think that that's so true. And once you really get that, like that's when you can have these really supportive, secure, healthy relationships. If you're constantly seeking outside of yourself, and not just with a romantic partner, with any relationship, for validation, for happiness, for satisfaction, you're never going to get that out of them because we can't control other people. We can only control ourselves. So I think it's really good advice to know that you don't need anyone. You shouldn't be with someone because you need them. You should be with someone because you love them and you want to spend time with them and you want to build a partnership together and grow together. It's not a need. It's a want.
Absolutely. I love that advice so much. That's something I wish we could shout from the rooftops because there are so many people who need to hear it. And to anyone who is hearing that and is like, "Oh, like maybe that is me who feels like I need somebody else to completely me like I get it. I've been there. I think we've all been there and
Yeah.
just know that you're incredible and you deserve to recognize all of the greatness that you have and somebody will, but also remember to like yourself too.
It's so important.
It
And if
is.
you want more love, just be love. Be more loving to yourself. Give yourself that love first.
Yeah. And be open. Be open to
Mhm.
love. Be open to it all. This has been incredible. Thank you so, so much for joining us. Where can everybody find you and the pod?
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. This was so fun and I love talking about these things. So I'm so excited for everyone to hear it. And if you haven't listened, like Alana said, to our podcast together on my show, you definitely should. I host the Loving Wellness podcast. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And my Instagram is at Ava Nouri Wellness. Same with TikTok. And my website is avanuriwellness.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And to everyone who listened, thank you for listening. Please, please, please give a 5-star rating and review. It helps more than you know. Share this episode on your story, tag the both of us, send it to your group chat, send it to friends. All of this really means the world. Anything you can do, even if it's just a little clicking the 5 stars on my podcast, on the Loving Wellness podcast, go there,
Yes.
click the 5-star button, leave a nice review, spread love, do it. We will love you forever for it, even though we already do. Okay, bye.
Bye.